So first of all, we'll just share a little bit about client conversations. I want to welcome you. I'm Carol Wedge, the CEO of Shepley Bulfinch, and I'm the host for this series with the BSA. It's something we envisioned for the year when we're not together physically, but can certainly share great ideas. And we really wanted to focus on the client's perspective. So we're holding these the second Tuesday of every month, and they're focused around quarterly themes, spotlighting clients and their projects, and our BSA colleagues who are working with them to understand their strategies for managing change. So this is the beginning of our second quarter, and we're excited to have the theme Engines of the Market. So joining us today are Rick Malmstrom from Alexandria, Jacob Knowles from BR+A, and Cathy Bell from NBBJ. The format for this is that we're going to actually start with kind of a simulated socializing. If we were together in the BSA, we'd be grabbing coffee and saying hello to each other and chatting. So we're going to put you in breakout rooms. The breakout rooms are not recorded and gives you a little time to meet each other, ask questions, and think about what you want to learn from this session today. So Patricia's going to move us to breakout rooms, and we'll see you in about 15 minutes. And then we'll have the presentation and plenty of time for questions and dialogue. So we look forward to seeing you in a little bit. Great. So we have a little housekeeping before we get started. I'm not going to read all of this. I'll let you absorb it. But the most important thing is we are recording this session, and we do make a video archive available. So you'll be able to share it with colleagues or others or actually view it again. So watch for that on the BSA website. And if there's something you don't want us to record, feel free to turn off your video. And the BSA will also put the continuing ed link in the chat. So if you'd like continuing ed credits for this session, please send your information in the chat and follow that link. So I'd love to introduce our guests. We'll be sharing the story of Alexandria's project 325 Binney today. It's a low carbon lab building. And we have 3 different engines of the market presentation this quarter, so we hope you'll come to those as well. Oh, sorry, I'm jumping around for Patricia. Sorry to make you crazy. So today is the life sciences and sustainability. And next slide. Rick Malmstrom is our first guest. He's the Executive Director of Sustainable Operations at Alexandria Real Estate Equities. In his role, Rick oversees the sustainability efforts and operations, new developments, Alexandria's greater Boston region, but we were also talking with him. He has roles across the organization. So we'd love to hear more about that from Rick. But currently the greater Boston region currently covers over 7 million square feet of properties. Rick focuses on energy usage, carbon reduction efforts, leads efforts to build sustainable and resiliency into all of their new projects. And of course, Rick has, the personal life of serving on the City of Cambridge Net Zero Energy Task Force, the Climate Resiliency Zoning Task Force, provide really important input into the future plans for net zero efforts being explored by the City of Cambridge. And then Rick also participates in Boston at a Better Cities Efficient and Resilient Buildings Working Group, helping to provide input on Boston's effort to reduce carbon. Rick, we're excited to hear your perspective today. I know we already have a lot of questions from my breakout group, so it'll be a vibrant dialogue at the end. Second, joining us is Cathy Bell, a senior architect and studio leader at NBBJ Boston. She brings more than 25 years of experience as an architect, project manager on complex projects of all scales. Cathy's many clients include developers, colleges, universities, and corporations. She leads collaborative teams through programming, all design phases of planning, new construction, renovation, tenant fit out, and adaptive reuse. And Cathy's worked in the US and around the world. And the third person joining us today is Jacob Knowles. He's Director of Sustainable Design at BR+A. He leads their sustainability consulting team. He's a net zero energy guru, and we've heard from Jacob before. He has lots to share. He's spearheading millions of square feet of carbon neutral and carbon positive projects. With the help of his team from BR+A, I know some of those folks joined us today. BR+A has received AIA Coat Top 10 Awards and the I2SL Go Beyond Awards. Jacob's also serving as a board member at the BSA this year. So we have the great pleasure of having the 3 of you join us. They're going to share some thoughts for about 20 minutes about their project on Binney Street, and then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat as soon as you have them, and I'll be monitoring the chat and the questions, and we'll turn it over to Jacob. Okay, Jacob's driving, and I think Rick's going to start.
I was muted there. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Alexandria is very pleased to be able to be at this presentation. First of all, I want to thank BSA for putting this on and giving us the opportunity. I also want to thank my co-speakers, Cathy Bell and Jacob Knowles. We really, Alexandria couldn't have done this project without their help. That's really help with a capital H. They've been a great team to work with, very forward-thinking, very responsive to our needs. And between them and their colleagues, many colleagues have been working on this project for a long time. It has made this possible. Next slide. And again. So let's talk about 325 Binney Street. As you probably all know, we have a lot of buildings in the Kendall Square area. The OKS, we call it, One Kendall Square development, or campus as we call it, is right next to 325, and 325 will actually become part of that campus. Down Binney Street towards the river, we have the Alexandria Center at Kendall Square. Again, some modern buildings that we built down there. And it's another big campus, many buildings, hundreds of thousands of square feet. And over down below towards MIT is the older but new inside, old outside, Technology Square. And these three campuses make up main holdings, but we have many, many other buildings. I believe Carol said 7 million square feet, but we're quite a bit beyond that now. Everything we have on paper or in design in the suburbs in Boston and Cambridge are approaching 12 million square feet when they're all done. Next slide. So this is what 325 Binney is going to look like when it's finished. We're looking from Binney Street, and to the right is Fulkerson, and to the left is the Binney Street extension, and to our lower left is Galileo Drive. One of the features we'll touch on later is the window to wall ratio. You can see this here, but we also have a beautiful H unit that's going to be in there. Still energy efficient, even though it has all that glass. And we have a nice outdoor area there in front of the building. One of the things that we are cognizant of, our tenants, our potential tenants, are very demanding in that not only do they need high-tech space to perform their research, but they like amenities as well. They have to compete for their employees. So in their eyes, having a nice structure that functions well is important, as well as being sustainable. We're seeing that sustainability is not just an afterthought anymore. It's they come in looking for a sustainable building. Everybody wants to make sure that they do their part to help us in this crisis we're in now. Next slide. So this is the footprint of the building site. I was talking in our breakout group about the railroad tracks in the Grand Junction Trail. You can see that along the top. And you can see some of the things we're doing, like the blue bikes and the bike racks. We have a full locker room, shower area, and indoor bike storage for employees. And to the right there, you can see this is a funny shaped parcel. And you can see all that green space that we'll be doing. And underneath that will be our approximately 80 geothermal wells, closed loop, roughly 600 feet deep. And that, you'll learn later, has a big effect on the building energy usage. So we'll go ahead. And Cathy, I'll let you take over from here.
Thank you, Rick. Well, as many on this call would agree, an excellent project starts with an excellent client. And Rick and the Aree client, certainly that. We enjoy very much working with them on this. They're a challenging client, challenging in a good way, and challenged us as a design team to do a number of things on this project. A few things Rick's touched on. So design a building that would act as a linchpin to the Aree buildings in Kendall Square, as Rick had touched on. Create a building that was a good neighbor to its East Cambridge surrounds and that respected and enhanced its Kendall Square context. Create an efficient floor plan, flexible both lab and office that took advantage of the density and FAR allowed on the site. Also creating a building that promoted and supported healthy environments, including access to natural light. And also certainly not the last challenge, but a big challenge and something that is important, I think, to everyone on the team, is to create one of the most sustainable lab buildings to date. So one of the main aspects as architects, as we start looking at this, is the building design that supports creating the most sustainable building that we can create is a high performance envelope. So first of all, you'll see the building is not a glass building. There is some curtain wall at the south facade there, which I'll touch on in a minute. However, other than that, the building is primarily made up of a opaque rain screen with tactile panels. Tactile is for those who don't know, the ultra high performance concrete panels. So essentially punched windows in an opaque wall. We have 6 inches of mineral insulation, and our R value for the opaque wall is R22. I have a lot more metrics. I won't get into it. We can, if you have questions, I'll answer. The windows are triple glazed, and working with the natural light, they're close to floor to ceiling in height. Some other metrics, just quickly, 6 stories with an entirely closed penthouse. All the mechanical equipment is within the building. Floor to floor ceiling heights from 14.6 to 16.6. We have 2 levels of garage underneath. And the floor plate, given the maxing out the FAR, as you'll see here, we've inserted an atrium, and that helps work in bringing the natural daylight deeper into the floor plate. It also works, as Rick had said, to provide an amenity. It's amenity of not only daylight, but spaces for informal gathering, social gathering, as well as more formal gathering. There's an atrium section on the lower left there. Next slide, Jack. And so just quickly, our facade overall is just under 35% glazing. And as I said before, it's made up of primarily punched openings. There's the tactile panels, as well as metal panels that surround the accent and surround the windows. And you can see on the right the floor to ceiling windows and how much from the inside, how big these windows really appear. Rick, I don't know if you want to add to that.
You're on mute, Rick.
Yeah, this is a fine balancing act, and I think the architects have done a great job here. The balance is between energy efficiency and having enough light to provide a wellness building, if you will, a healthy building. There are standards that you have to meet. They sort of conflict. The most efficient, energy efficient building would have no windows, and the most light would have all windows. And it's a challenge sometimes to find that middle ground. And I think they've done a great job here. As you can see in the right, it's a lot of light in this working space. But as Cathy mentioned, they're triple glazed windows, and they're punched out of a very efficient frame. So I think, and that's the first thing you need to do to make a really sustainable building, is to, right from the get-go, make your envelope good enough so that you can reduce the amount of energy that the mechanical systems have to provide.
Jacob.
So as we approach all our buildings now, sort of a 3-step, how do we get to carbon neutral and net zero, however you want to frame it. Energy efficiency is the first, obviously. The lower you can get the building's BTU requirements, that gets you off to a great start. And also, as you'll see later, we're striving to minimize fossil fuel. It would have been great to eliminate it, but because it's a lab building, because we have such high ventilation requirements, we're just not there yet. But this building will use about as little as it possibly can for such a use. And then when the project's complete, we will be, well, actually, we'll have some solar panels on the roof, and then we will be purchasing offsite renewable energy to offset the remaining power to get us to net zero.
So thanks, Rick. We wanted to give a little context here just for the whole audience to think about what's happening in a broader realm beyond the project, and part of why we're all headed in this direction. So one, obviously the reason ultimately is climate change, but there's also regulatory requirements coming into effect across the country in different states. And Massachusetts now, with the new climate bill that just passed, is going to be one of the leaders in defining a net zero energy code. Likely by late 2022, the DOER will be promulgating a municipal opt-in net zero stretch code that after that, towns can then opt into that program and adopt that net zero standard. And in addition to the net zero code, there's also carbon neutral zoning that's going into effect in different cities and towns. So Somerville has already passed theirs. There's overlay districts and density bonuses where many buildings that are being built in Somerville must meet fossil fuel free carbon neutral standards. Lab buildings in Somerville get a pass on that to some degree, but still have to meet LEED Platinum. Boston, right now we're working on carbon neutral zoning for the city of Boston, which will define limits for building emissions and then mandate that that remaining energy consumption be offset, similar to what Rick described, to get to carbon neutral for all new buildings starting in the near future. And we know also Cambridge, as Rick mentioned, he's working on as part of their advisory group to help guide Cambridge move towards carbon neutral standards. And a little shout out here to Brookline and other towns that have been pushing and pioneering a move towards mandating electrification. In addition to new construction, there's also a move towards regulating existing buildings. So similar to, new car has to meet a miles per gallon standard, right? Old cars still have to get inspected and tuned up so they're not polluting too much too, right? So same thing with buildings. Look at the existing building stock, and there's many places across the country now that are requiring not just reporting on energy data, but also a move towards energy reduction. New York City was one of the pioneers with Local Law 97, where they're moving towards an 80% reduction in building emissions citywide by 2050. And Boston is now following in their footsteps with 100% carbon reduction by 2050, ratcheting down in 5-year increments over time. And there will be, in both locations, financial impacts and compliance payments to the city if you're not in compliance. So, this is a smart investment in the future to be building these low carbon buildings, even labs and healthcare, because at some point there will be a financial impact if you're not in alignment with those carbon reduction goals. So if you build it right today, you'll be smooth sailing in the future. Now, why does everybody keep talking about electrification? Sometimes people worry that tying to the grid and running an electric building has a lot of emissions too. And it's true, the electric grid is not carbon neutral yet unless you buy renewable energy to offset your electricity consumption. But if you just plug into the grid, if you plug in a heat pump that's say 300% efficient, you're actually having half as much emissions as if you burned natural gas to heat your building. And that's already based on 2018 data, and the emissions for the grid keeps coming down. So not only is a heat pump far lower emissions today than burning fossil fuels, in the future it'll become dramatically lower. And the climate bill is actually another big driver of that, where they've now, by law, we have to be at 40% renewables on the grid by 2030. And then there's also nuclear. And so the grid is actually not only clean now, but getting cleaner very quickly. So it makes sense to pursue electrification for buildings rather than burning fossil fuel. Now, as Rick mentioned, labs today are not quite ready in a cold climate like Boston to be 100% electric. You need backup power, you need peaking heat and backup heat. And so all of the net zero standards and carbon neutral standards that we've been looking at, whether it be codes or zoning, all recognize this fact and allow fossil fuel combustion as backup and peaking systems like generators and boilers, particularly for lab buildings. Just that is an absolute necessity.
So our building has a number of sustainability aspects to it. You can see on the slide, I won't read all of it, but you know, we're pursuing certifications and LEED. Right now we're tracking LEED Gold. The Fitwell certification, we're meeting the preconditions there. Also looking at reducing our embodied carbon in the building. 20% reduction over a building that we analyzed, one of Aree's buildings, so creating our own metric. We also have, as Rick mentioned, the geothermal ground source heating and cooling to reduce energy demand, and water reduction measures. We have three things we're doing there. We have a blue roof system that captures the rainwater. We have condensate capture. And then we're also capturing the groundwater, the underslab groundwater, and using all of that for both irrigation and cooling tower makeup in order to reduce the water use overall.
So here's the thing that gets me most excited about this project is a lot of you probably who've worked on labs are familiar with Convecta. I probably shouldn't say the brand name, but advanced runaround heat recovery system for capturing the energy out of the exhaust air and putting it back into the supply air. So that is nothing new. Many buildings are using this type of technology. But what's really cool is we're taking it to the next level. So normally you can see in this diagram up top, we have the exhaust air handler that's exhausting all the air out of the building. On the bottom, we have the makeup air handler that's supplying the air back into the building. And that's bringing in 100% fresh air into the system. A typical glycol runaround system is going to have one coil in the exhaust and one coil in the supply. And it's going to circulate that water back and forth to transfer the heat energy. So one of the things we're doing to make that more efficient is we're adding a second coil in the supply air handler that not only provides more surface area to get better heat transfer, but it also wraps around, you can see in the center here, the cooling coil. And so you get free reheat and additional pre-cooling off of that in the summertime. But that's just the step one. Step two is, and this may seem shocking to some, we are actively going to frost the coil in the exhaust air handler on the coldest days of winter. So we're going to pull out not only every BTU down to freezing point and stay above freezing, which is what normal exhaust systems do. We're going to actually drop below freezing, allow humidity to condense onto that coil, build up a small layer of frost, grab all those extra BTUs out of that exhaust air, and then circulate that heat back into the supply unit. And so this is one of the few in the world of these types of systems that will be doing this. I'm sure there'll be many more in the near future. We're working on a few now, actually. But this is really one of the first in the US that's doing this. There's a few in Europe, I think about 12 or 15 at this point. And so there's a really critical way of monitoring and making sure that you don't build up too much frost, because you could trip the exhaust units on high static. So there's a timing where the coils frost and defrost in a series to be able to maintain a very minimal pressure drop impact and not let the coils actually fully frost up. Now that unlocks the potential to use that exhaust as a source of heat beyond just what a glycol loop can do by tying in a heat pump chiller. So we're actually turning that exhaust coil and tying a heat pump chiller to it to make it essentially into an air source heat pump. So people are probably familiar with mini splits on people's houses, that in the wintertime are pulling heat out of the air from outside and putting it into their house to heat their house electrically very efficiently. Well, this is the 500-pound gorilla lab version of that, where as that exhaust air is leaving the building, we're not only going to pull it down as much as we can passively, but we're going to actively use the heat pump to super cool the fluid going into that coil, pull every last BTU of heat out of that air, and then inject that heat back into on the supply side. It's basically like a supercharger for the exhaust heat recovery system. So there's some really, really cool innovations on this that are combining, technology that we've used many times in the past, but in a really new and innovative way.
Okay, so this is a energy use modeling through a course of a year of this building. And as you can see, a vast majority of heating cooling comes via the combination of what Jacob was just talking about. The heat recovery, the geothermal wells, such that you can see the greens, the dark greens and the medium greens. So we have that base usage that is supplying highly efficient, low/no carbon energy to the building. Of course, we do have some chillers that will take those peak summer loads. And then, but the most amazing thing is the gas heat, the dark red. As you can see the graph, look along the year, there just isn't a lot of usage there. The pink is humidification, excuse me. And that is going a TBD, if you will, excuse me, to see how much we actually need. Hoping it's a little less than that, but we do have to have that capability to meet the wellness air needs. I think COVID has sort of shined a light on indoor humidity for health, but it's pretty amazing at how much of the BTUs we require are met by those geo and the heat recovery. And that allows us to minimize the fossil fuel usage. Next slide. Excuse me. So this is a tale of the tape, if you will. These are buildings, some of them are ours, some of them are others, of lab buildings in the city of Cambridge. And the EUI, the energy use intensity of those buildings by fuel, gas, and electric. And on the far right, you can see 325 Binney. And that is a staggering low EUI for a laboratory building with 100% outside air. And that is, clearly the product of a great design, everything from the envelope to all the mechanical systems that my colleagues just talked about. We like to say it's the most efficient lab building ever. We certainly know it is in Cambridge. And it probably, we're not aware of any building anywhere that houses laboratories and has such a low EUI. And that will benefit us for years, not only because we'll be reducing our carbon footprint, but also financially, because the offsets that we will be required to buy are so much lower because the building is so efficient.
Yeah, I think one thing to really point out here is this dark green little slice at the very bottom here. That's the fossil fuel consumption anticipated for heating the building. The hatched is the humidification fossil fuel consumption. So we put that at the top because it's kind of a bonus feature from a health perspective. So if you look just at the amount of gas we need to heat the building after we've done all that heating with the heat pump systems, the EUI for gas for heating is down in the single digits. And that's, as you can see from these other buildings that are benchmarked, that's a dramatic shift. So we're in the range of a 90+% reduction in fossil fuel compared to the benchmark. And that's, again, and it's okay to have some fossil fuels as backup and peaking systems. If you can shave off 90–95%, then I'd say you've done a pretty incredible job.
Yeah, it's simply amazing. So here we are, end of our presentation. And I have to say, it's a nice looking building too, for all the features that we have that we'll be able to offer our tenants and the sustainability that we're able to build in. It's a nice looking building too. Thank you to NBBJ for that. I guess, Carol, now we'll open it up to any questions.
Yeah, we already have some questions. The first one was, first of all, wonderful project, astounding project. Jacob, you're going to have to go through that advanced heat recovery a few more times for our whole audience to really understand it. So I'll just put that in as a plug. But one of the questions is, how much are the sustainable design goals for this and other projects driven by the city versus the client or the market? Rick, do you feel like you could answer that? Is that a blend, or Jacob did a nice job of showing it's coming, but for Alexandria, can you just explain a little bit why this vision of being an incredibly sustainable company?
Yeah, I think blend is a perfect word for that. We do have corporate goals. We want to get to net zero sooner than required. I think the state and others are looking at 2050 for 100%. We feel we'll be there before then. So it is a blend. We have our own goals in mind, but we also keep close tabs on the municipal and state goals as well. Like you mentioned, I'm on a couple of committees with the city of Cambridge, and basically we're making sure they don't require things that don't work. When I say that are not necessarily technically feasible or financially feasible, at the end of the day, we still have to be able to offer our spaces to our tenants at a reasonable rate, so that we don't price ourselves out of the market. So it's a blend. It's sort of, again, we have our goals, but we're always watching the municipal and state goals as well.
And evolving them forward. There's another follow-up question that says, how does Aree tie the rent cost to EY or energy performance, or how do you think about that? Can you just follow up on how that pro forma or ROI gets thought about inside Alexandria?
Well, it's a win-win, because when you have such low usage, you have lower operating costs, and that translates into savings for the tenants. And that's something that we can market to our potential tenants, in that not only will you be part of a sustainability effort, but in the long run, over the course of time, your operating costs will be reduced as well.
Jacob, I think this one might be for you. Are you working with Eversource and other utilities with their, and it's the lab efficiency division, to really understand how the utility and the grid are thinking about efficiency? Can you talk a little bit about that?
So we are working with Eversource in terms of getting the utility incentives. We just finished the analysis for the utility incentive program, and they do see the benefit of this in terms of peak load reduction. And I think that's actually an interesting thing that is kind of a misnomer. Most people think of electric buildings as increasing the peak electric demand, and that's somehow going to overwhelm the grid and become a problem in the future. Now, that's only true in the case where you're taking an existing building that has no cooling, like a multifamily building that has no cooling, and then you're electrifying it. Yeah, that's going to add some electric demand. But a building like this, a conventional design, is going to have a very high peak electrical load in cooling, right? Your peak is actually in cooling. And by using this hybrid strategy where we have both heat pumps and then gas for peaking and backup, our peak electrical demand in wintertime is less than our peak in summertime. And because we're very efficient, our peak in summertime is less than a peak of a conventional design. So our peak demand is actually less than a conventional building, even though we're so removed from fossil fuels in terms of normal operation. So that's definitely been a big focus for us, to make sure that we don't increase the peak electric demand, so that the utilities, see that as an advantage, not only to incentivize it financially, but that we're not going the wrong direction in terms of overwhelming the grid.
I was going to say, can you follow up on maybe a peek behind the curtain of, as you talk about this advanced heat recovery, you say there are very few buildings in the country that have ever done it, very few in the world. How did you navigate with confidence with Rick and Cathy that this system was going to work? What modeling did you do? Can you tell us a little bit about that? We're going to do something really different and innovative, but also sort of manage the confidence that it will work?
Yeah, so there's actually multiple ways that one can do heat pumps for a lab building. And we have two of them on this. The three ways overall are ground source, air source, and exhaust source. So in this case, we have ground source and exhaust source. The exhaust source system, we've only applied it to there's basically two towers in one that make up this whole building. And so there's a set of air handlers that serve the larger tower, and there's a set of air handlers that serve the smaller tower. And it's about 2/3, 1/3 roughly. And we only applied this technology to the 2/3 portion of the building because, again, new for Alexandria, relatively new for us. So it was kind of a toe in the water kind of an approach to say, look, this technology, all the components are proven. We know there are other examples of this around the world, but maybe we don't want to go all in on the first time, right? We do have now subsequent jobs that are wanting to continue to expand on this idea and apply it to the whole building. But certainly Alexandria is way out ahead. I mean, these other ones are really in early design, and Alexandria's got BR+A in construction now. And that it really was Alexandria's leadership that opened this opportunity. So many developers, I think, look to Alexandria as the gold standard. And Alexandria is so established, they can bring to the market something that's newer and innovative that people won't fear that they're doing something risky because they're so confident that Alexandria's got their act together. So I think it really took an Alexandria to break open this new innovative solution and start to bring that approach to market. I do want to mention there is that other third strategy that we didn't use here, which is the air source heat pumps. And that's much more of an off-the-shelf vanilla kind of approach. You just add some air source heat pumps to your system, plunk and dunk kind of an approach. It's not this integrated with the exhaust system kind of a strategy. So it's not as efficient, but it is much more kind of run of the mill. And we have millions of square feet of labs in design right now use the air source heat pump strategy. So there's a lot of different pathways that one can get to this electrification approach, but this is kind of the premier approach and this really,
Well, and maybe a peek to the future, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So Rick, maybe to build on that, how does Alexandria shepherd this vision across all of its projects? It's a big organization with a lot of different people, lots of different confidence and experience in sustainability and understanding these systems.
Well, that's part of the mission of our department within Alexandria is to sort of spread that throughout the organization. It's to touch back on what Jacob said, we look at it more as an iteration of existing. I think he hit the key point in that is a very integrated design. We could have done plunk and dunk air side pumps, but this works better, we believe. And we have confidence in our designers, and we are not at all worried. The last thing we would ever want to do is to try something that was risky and jeopardize the success of our tenants. We just wouldn't go there. As I mentioned, I think it was the breakout room. We have the set of standards for sustainability, a one-page document with 25 or 30 line items that gets handed to the designer on day one. So they know what our expectations are as far as lead and fit well and whatnot. And we stay involved to make sure that, like this project turned out, what we're doing makes sense for us and our tenants. And we're finding not much resistance to it because it's everybody's talking sustainability. It's no longer something out here where we're thinking about for the future. It's now, it's today. And between us as owners and our future tenants and existing tenants, it's a real issue that we want to grapple with now. And I don't think grapple is a good word. It's a issue we want to address.
Innovate. Yeah, innovate, address and innovate, right? Your iterative innovation. Right. Cathy, there's a question that's, I think, more central to you. Can you talk a little bit about how embodied carbon was addressed? And then I'd piggyback on that. Can you talk a little bit more about how you evaluated the different envelope alternatives? I see triple glazing get shut down at the early meeting, like you can never come back to it. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So embodied carbon, working with Thornton Tomasetti and looking at, what were the metrics? Like, how do we? Aree was like, well, how do we set what our metric is? How do we set what we want to save? And so with Thornton Tomasetti, they analyzed one of Aree's buildings that they finished a few years ago, and so that was the benchmark. And so looking at 325 Vinny, we came up with, in looking at what it could be, said, you know what, a good marker would be to save 20% over that other Aree building. So a good amount of that is certainly within the structure, right? So looking at what our concrete mix is, and working with Moriarty on the project to identify how we could find that mix with without going to either an obscure source or so proprietary that the cost would be driven out. So and then as far as the envelope, there the one thing about Aree, they and there was a question about how do you manage confidence. We did many studies, options, Jacob and BR+A. I mean, just looking at what our wall makeup could be, and how does that relate to the systems that were being designed. And so just many studies with the energy model, with working with Thornton Tomasetti as our envelope consultant to run the numbers on the thermal analysis. So many studies, many discussions. It wasn't just kind of pick something and run. There was many things that we looked at.
Right. Lots of integrated modeling. Jacob, there's all sorts of questions in here for you about BTUs and how many BTUs per hour per gross square feet. I'm sure you have that memorized.
Well, yeah, we track all these metrics. We're at 14 on 325 Benny. And that's that point where you're really unlocking this 95% fossil fuel reduction, and making it cost effective and not increase the peak electric load. So, we're in that range now, pushing up into that range of 14 BTUs per hour per square foot on other projects also. And that seems to be that real sweet spot that unlocks this great carbon reduction.
That's great. Rick, back to you. There's a question about, with the pursuit of well building standard guiding the building design, does Aree measure building occupant productivity, and how do you do that, and what does it mean for the market and your tenants, and is that part of the discussion today?
We have such a wide variety of tenants, and that's really, to be honest, is not something we're doing right now. We obviously will market that. This is a very healthy building, a well ventilated, great temperature control. But well certification is an operational certification. It happens after occupancy. I think the whole sustainability approach we market the fact that it is fit well certified and well ready, as they call it, because when you complete a building, you can't get well certified because it's a lot of it is operational after the fact, after a tenant moves in. But we don't measure productivity. To be honest, I don't know how we would do that. Whether the tenants do or not, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, I think it's one of those post-occupancy, occupancy-related aspects that's coming towards us to show what these buildings can do. I wanted to just change course before we run out of time, and give each of you a chance to just talk a little bit about your personal journey, how this has become important to you professionally. You all serve on other committees that care about sustainability. Can you talk a little bit about just sort of your personal career around these topics, and then where you hope to go in the next, say, 5 to 10 years. Just a little sort of maybe look back, look forward of what you're hopeful for. So Jacob, do you want to start?
Oh, sure. Make me go first.
Well, I'm giving your client a chance to think.
All right, good. Good plan.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I actually went to school for architecture, and not even a very technical architecture program. It was Rhode Island School of Design, and it was all about a philosophy, an approach to design that was, creative and engaged and integrated with, the environment and all those things. And so that's really, I think, what was why I picked that program, and what has continued to guide me throughout my career to say, integration, sustainability has always been core to what I care about. And getting into engineering has been awesome, because you really get into the details of how does this work? How are you actually going to solve this problem? And so it's so fun, working with clients like Rick and Cathy. I think I saw Jay Siebenmorgan on here earlier, one of the designers for the design architects for this project. That care and are like have this aligned mission, and we're all working together as a team and relying on each other's technical experience to achieve these goals. And it's just so satisfying to have this be my life. It's like, couldn't be happier.
That's great. Cathy, do you want to go next?
Sure. Well, it's interesting because I actually started out in engineering and then went into architecture. Yeah, opposite of Jacob. But I think that for me, the question around managing confidence, it gets to what I really enjoy about a project is the integration, is the many people that come together to do the project, but also that I get to work with. And I do, as far as sustainability, I mean, it's certainly a responsibility as an architect, as a designer, to we build these buildings, and we have that responsibility to really push on how to make the world better, right? That's our responsibility. But I enjoy the day-to-day and truly understanding or trying to understand how to take those big aspirations that we have on a project and really make sure that we're doing what we said what we would do, and certainly learning on every project and wanting to push every project. So that's where I definitely want to go. And I've certainly having Jacob, he's a good pusher. So he's
Yes. That's great. And Rick, last to you.
Okay, well, before I came to Alexandria, I worked in healthcare, in mainly the operational side. A lot of lab buildings, a lot of patient care, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. But one of the things that was always a little frustrating was that I was always trying to make existing buildings more efficient, and saw time after time, if only they had fill in the blank when they built this building, we could have made it even more efficient. And I came to Alexandria because I'd known about the reputation for sustainability and the importance that they put it. Other places just don't have the bandwidth to sort of deal with that. Alexandria makes the bandwidth available. So I'm thrilled that I'm involved from the get-go. Our sustainability team is involved from the get-go, so that we'll end up with a building that's efficient from day one. And then our operations people just have to take care of it well to keep it there. One of the things we'll be adding to this building, I don't think we've mentioned before, is monitoring-based commissioning on the building systems and building automation systems, so that it stays as efficient as it was on day one. But it's an exciting time to be in this field because of the technology advances, and not just newfangled stuff. It's the way of making existing systems and the equipment work better together. And I have to give a shout out to the team, not only NBBJ and BR+A, but also my colleagues at Aree who have been involved with this project for many, many years. I've only been here a little more than a year. Really put her nose to the grindstone to make this happen. And it's just great to be here and we'll be moving on to the next building with the lessons learned. So that's exciting that the next bunch of buildings that we'll be looking at, we'll be doing the same thing. You know, maybe we'll get to that no fossil fuel. Fingers crossed. We're so close, but not quite there. But it's a very exciting time to be in this field.
That's great. That's great. Well, there are a lot of other questions about cost in here, which I'm going to give you a quick chance to answer. But I think some of your colleagues are answering them for you. So it's definitely like we have a village on the call of the team helping contribute to it. But, you know, for each of you, I think there are those questions. Sometimes I can't tell if it's people who just haven't been exposed to more innovative, sustainable projects, but the concern that it costs so much more. And so, you know, I was going to give it to Jacob first and then maybe Rick to just respond to that kind of perception that sustainability costs a lot more.
This is like foundational to our whole mission is if we're just going to be extravagant and you know, have most expensive projects can achieve net zero, then we've certainly failed. And I think what's exciting about studies like the Built Environment Plus report that you can see on their website is they've surveyed millions of square feet of net zero buildings across the state and gotten 50% of those submissions gave them a summary of their cost comparison to say, where did you fall looking at a conventional design versus your net zero ready design? So not including the cost of the solar panels, but everything you need to do to make your building all electric and ultra efficient or close to all electric for labs. Now, what does that cost? And it was resounding. I think 85% of the respondents indicated it was less than a 1% construction cost premium. So not nothing. 1% is definitely, there's some cost involved in some cases, but a lot of them are right around that cost neutral mark. And so we obviously want to provide the same for our clients. We're not interested in just spending money unwisely for our clients. Alexandria is certainly not going to, you know, do that. So it's really been an integrated process working on like, well, if you do better envelope, can you eliminate some of the systems? If you do better heat recovery, can you take some credit on the boiler and chiller plant? If you do, you know, if you do, for example, chilled beams or a fan clearance is the standard for what they have to use in the fit out, can we reduce the size of the air handlers a little bit, at least for the office spaces? I know that with labs, those brokers, they want to see CFM in those lab areas, but for the offices, you can reduce that CFM and provide very healthy air quality and so forth. So if you can start to shrink some of those 500-pound gorilla systems, there's big bucks on the table that can help fund some of these investments in moving towards carbon neutral. So it's really a win-win if you do it right.
Well, and as Rick mentioned, if you start to monitor the lower operating costs, all of a sudden it's the total picture of a project, not just the first cost. And so that it's the whole life cycle of the building.
Yeah, I used to live in life cycle land, and now I'm like, if you can make the first cost close to cost neutral, then it becomes a no-brainer. So I'm like super focused on first cost. I know that sounds weird for a sustainability guy, but
no, that's great. That's great. Rick, there's a couple other questions about excuse me, how you're going to do the monitoring-based commissioning, or how you're thinking about maintaining the building and monitoring the commissioning on an ongoing way going forward. Can you just say a little bit about that?
Sure. I've been using monitoring-based commission for 10 or 15 years in existing buildings. And when I refer to that, what I'm talking about is these systems that sort of glom on top of your building automation system and run values and set points through algorithms that alert you when things get out of range. So you don't have to do anything special ahead of time. You can sort of coordinate integration at the end of the building construction time, but it's something you can do in an existing building, and it's just it's not free, but it's very lucrative in both cost reduction, carbon reduction, and comfort increasing. And there's several firms that do it out there.
That's great. That's great. So we're about the end of our time. I feel like you've used the, sort of innovation and integration words over and over again. So I think, as a good model for all of us, trusting the integration of the team is incredibly important in these projects. A couple of people have asked more detailed questions. I'd encourage you to follow up with Jacob or Cathy or Rick. But I want to thank you and give you a virtual round of applause. That was a fabulous presentation. Such an exciting project. We're so, I'll be poking Jacob and Rick and Cathy to see when we can get tours, because I think people would love to see, even a kind of hard hat tour of the systems in play before there are any tenants in the building. So I want to thank everyone. Your feedback's really important to us. Please let us know how you think we can make the presentations and client conversations better. And we hope that you'll join us next month for our next conversation, where we'll be showcasing the new global Class A standard building, the Winthrop Center, with Kathy McNeil from Millennium Partners and Nicole Lakina from Millennium Partners as well. So have a great day, everyone. We really appreciate that you joined us. A special thank you to Rick and Cathy and Jacob, and we'll hopefully see you next month. And we'll end with a shout out to our SMPS partner. We really appreciate their support. We appreciate the BSA support, and really value the fact that all of you joined us this morning, and look forward to meeting together again, hopefully in the fall in person. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys. That was great. What an amazing project. So fun to kind of get into the details of it. And Jacob, thank you for showing that broader perspective of how performance requirements are changing. And this doesn't have to be a discussion of, are we doing this, but how we're going to do it.
Yeah, Carol, you and Patricia are amazing hosts. Thank you so much for having us. It was really an honor to be here.
Yeah, it was a blast.
Rick and Cathy, I mean, we're here to support you. So I'm just pumped to be working with you on this kind of project. So thank you.
Yeah, onward. You guys are doing great work. So thank you so much for joining us. Have a great day.